All right, welcome back for part 2 of the Advanced Techniques for Virus Removal. I'm still Ken Dwight, and we also have Monty Wilson assisting me with the questions. He's also has a microphone and can jump in if anything comes up in the way of questions that need my immediate attention. Otherwise, we'll do that toward the end. With as many people as we have, that'll be much more manageable than trying to go back and forth interactively. So one of the things that I expect when I do a 2-part webinar like this is we'll have fewer people on the second session than the first, and that's so far holding true. Because frankly, some of the people that went through the first part of the webinar think, nah, it's too much work. I'm just going to keep doing my scans, or I don't do many virus repairs anyway, or whatever. So point is, those of you that are here, welcome back. I'm glad you got enough content to want more, and I can promise you it's going to be worth your time. On the other hand, if you didn't attend part 1 or haven't listened to a replay of it, I'm going to assume that you know what all we covered. And so if that's not you, there's a good chance you're going to be lost. And you're certainly welcome to stick on this one if you want to, or if you'd rather go away, watch part 1, and then there will be a replay of this as well. So you always have that opportunity. So first one recorded just fine. It is out there on YouTube, and most of you should have gotten the link to replay it if you need to. So I have every reason to assume that this one will come through just fine as well. And if you stay on till the end, I do have a special offer that I think some of you will find attractive. So just a brief review of what we covered last week. Not going to rehash everything, but just to make sure everybody's up to speed and remembers what we talked about. Started off pretty simple, talking about terminology, definitions, making sure everybody's on the same page, using the same words to mean the same things. I did go into the overall sequence for finding and removing malware. And that's basically made up of 3 steps: find and get rid of the rogues. From there, deal with traditional malware, and wrap it up with rootkits. And there's a reason for that sequence that I hope made sense before, but we'll get into that in more detail today. I did give you a homework assignment, and so I hope that most of you were able to take advantage of that. And now here's your little quiz. I've got a poll that I'll send out there, and let's see what kind of response you get. All right, do you see the poll? And looks like it. So far, people are responding. Monty, you seeing that okay?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, good. And the results are coming in. Looking pretty good. And most of you are responding, too. I'm not going to wait for 100%, but we're up there approaching 90%. So let's give it about 5-6 more seconds. Okay, so 85% of you have voted. And here are the results. And I'll go ahead and click on share. I assume that will make it visible to you. So, can you see that, Monty? The results up?
My screen is changing right now. Yes, I do see that.
Okay, good. So over half of you did watch the video, so congratulations, thank you, and I trust you'll find that was time well spent. 21% more started but didn't finish, and I can understand that. It's about an hour and a half, and it's pretty intense, and so I suspect that some of you went back and replayed part of it and just haven't had enough time to get all the way through it. But the whole idea was to show you how much there is that is really applicable to this subject, and give you another source of information beyond just what I'm spouting out. None of you said you couldn't find the videos. That's a good sign, and means that all of you have decent skills in terms of searching and tracking things down, so that's obviously required in this business. 24% of you have not watched it, and that's okay too, because again, it was a extra credit type assignment, and I have no way of knowing how much of it is meaningful to you, so I'll just go ahead and move on from there. So next, just a quick review of the methodology for dealing with traditional malware. You find and identify any active viral or potentially malicious processes, and you do that through either Task Manager, Process Explorer, or some program like that. When you've done that, you terminate the process, and you're doing this one at a time. So I say processes and use the plural, but it's one at a time, then go back and look for the next one. But once you've terminated a process, you need to figure out how it got there in the first place. And then remove or restore any infected registry entries, because most of this is going to be coming from somewhere in the registry. That'll keep it from coming back. delete or clean the infected programs. Whether you delete or clean depends on whether it was a traditional piece of malware or a virus as opposed to a worm or Trojan. In case of a worm or Trojan, delete it. A virus, you're either going to have to disinfect that file or more commonly get a clean, fresh, uninfected copy of it. Then block the ability to reinstall it for it to come back. And then lather, rinse, repeat. Go back and look for the next one, do the same thing with it. So that's basically what we've been dealing with so far, and a lot of what Mark covered in that video. Yes, Mark, Monty?
We're still seeing the poll.
Oh, okay. Oh, there it is. It says hide poll results to enable screen sharing. Okay. Are you seeing the screen now or still the poll?
Well, sometimes it takes a few seconds, but so far I'm still seeing the poll.
Okay, how about now?
Well, I still see the poll now. Yeah, there's another person that says he still sees the poll.
Okay. Let me go back and see what I need to do about that. And I'm saying stop showing poll. Did it go away yet?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So now you're seeing the flow chart?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks for that feedback. I wouldn't have known if you hadn't been there, so thank you very much. Okay, so I know most of you have probably never seen a flow chart, or it's not something that's nearly as common these days as it was back when I started in the business. Back when I became a programmer trainee in 1966, this was the way you wrote a program. You flow charted out what that program needed to do, the different pieces of information, the processes, the decisions, and that sort of thing. And I think it lends itself really well to this overall process of dealing with malware. Because here we've broken it down to the three general categories. First of all, dealing with rogues. And again, as we touched on last week, the rogues are very much in your face. You probably have to deal with them before you can do anything else anyway. And there's usually only one rogue involved. So that brings us down to the middle part of the flow chart, which is most of it. And here again, one at a time, identify a malicious or suspicious process. At that point, kill it and see what happens. If the system's still running normally, then that lets you know that that process is not really required for Windows itself. It could be required for something you don't happen to be doing right now, but the point is Windows will run without it. So at that point, if it doesn't, if Windows dies once you kill that process, then you know it is required. So just make a note to yourself, it is a required process, reboot, and then you'll come back here looking for the next one. On the other hand, if the system's still running normally after you kill that process, look and see if it comes back on its own. Some malware will. A lot of it uses what's known as a buddy system, where there's another process looking to see if you've killed the main malware, and if you have, it'll restart it. So if that happens, it could be malicious, but not necessarily. There are a few legitimate programs that could do the same thing. So here I'm saying make a note of it as being suspicious, and then go back and look for the next one. On the other hand, if it wasn't required by Windows and doesn't come back on its own, then that lets you know that you really could probably get rid of it. You probably want to do some more, a little bit more homework before you actually remove it, but that's something you could do. So then go back and get the next one, go through that whole process until you've dealt with all of those processes that you've identified as malicious or suspicious. Now, you saw, those of you that watched the video, you saw Mark's process for doing that, and there's a lot involved. I want to show you a little bit simpler process that gets you off to a pretty good start, and that involves Task Manager instead of Process Explorer. Now, Process Explorer generally does everything the Task Manager does and a lot more. The catch is you may not have Process Explorer with you, or it may not be available for whatever reason when you're actually dealing with an issue. But you should always have Task Manager available. So we use that as kind of the lowest common denominator. And I want to just point out a few general things you're looking for in trying to figure out which of these processes are suspicious or potentially malicious. And on my machine right now, I have 125 processes running. So that could be a lot to go through. But you can make it easier in several ways. For one, sort alphabetically by image name. So like right now, I've got about 16 Chrome processes running. I don't have to identify all of them or go through each one. You identified one, you figured it out. By the same token, G2M is GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar. That's what we're using right now, and so I know what those are. A little bit farther down, I have 2 HP printers, and so I know what all those are, and the Mozy backups, and so on like that. So having them alphabetical makes it easier for you to go through at a glance and pick out the ones that you might have to be concerned about. A starting point for that would be under the description column. Now, if you're on a machine prior to Vista, Windows XP or earlier, you don't have a description column available to you in Task Manager, or the command line for that matter. And you may have noticed I've added some columns to mine. You can too, at least in Windows 7 and Vista. If you go to Options, actually it's under the View menu, select Columns. And so without going into a lot of details there, you'll probably recognize the columns I've added and potentially the value to them. But description should be there by default. And that's a big help in a lot of ways in making that determination. For one thing, I'd make a quick look through there and see if there are any that don't have a description. If they don't have a description, that would be very suspicious. A lot of malware won't bother to put a description in there. On the other hand, just because it has a description doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. Malware could certainly put something in there that says Microsoft whatever, or Google Chrome, or HP, or something that looks very legitimate. So that leads into the next thing you want to do, which is really the biggest part of it, and that is a consistency check. What I mean by that is look at the image name, the executable here. In this case, Chrome.exe. Then the command line. What folder is it in? And this is in the Google folder, Chrome, application. So all of that looks normal for Chrome.exe. And the description. So in this case, all of it matches. We can be pretty sure that those really are Chrome.exe and they're legitimate. Any of them you're suspicious of, like the G2Ms, if you didn't recognize those. That's under App Data Local Citrix. Citrix, of course, being the producer of GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, GoToMyPC, and whatever. And sure enough, the description says the same. So if you see anything inconsistent, a folder here that's a temporary internet files or temp folder, anything like that, that's not a place you would normally expect something legitimate to be running. If the description doesn't match the folder or the executable name or whatever, that's a pretty easy way, even in Task Manager, to make that basic determination of the ones that you probably need to be concerned about, check out farther, and go through the other part of that flow chart. So that's Task Manager that I know you're all well familiar with. So each one of those, go through that process. Eventually, when you've done all of them, then come down here, and it's time to look for a rootkit or a bootkit. Now, a bootkit is a rootkit that infects the master boot record or the boot sector, a rootkit that comes into play every time you reboot. We're actually going to talk about the more details about rootkits next, because that's a big part of what you need to deal with, and there's more and more of them out there today. So in dealing with rootkits in general, by definition, the rootkit infects a Windows component. Rootkits are very deeply buried, very well hidden, and they go to great extents to keep the user from knowing that the computer is infected, or even to keep the tech from knowing that the computer is infected. Because like any type of malware, it's all about making money. And the longer it can stay on that computer undetected, the more money they're making. As soon as the user or the tech sees any obvious symptoms, they're going to do something about it, and that gravy train stops. But there are at least 3 different things you can use as clues to let you know that there may be a rootkit present. The first one I'll mention is Google redirects. What I mean by that is the user does a search of some kind, using Google or whatever their favorite search engine is. They get that page of hits, and they click on one, it goes somewhere completely unrelated to their search. In most cases, when that happens, it won't be an obviously malicious site. It probably won't be a porn site or a gambling site, a drug site. It's more likely to be a search page or maybe a travel or resort type site. And so when that happens, the user is likely to kind of scratch their head and go back and click another link, and it goes where it should. Or even clicking the same link again will probably take it to where it should. So the point is, when you're getting redirects like that, it's not going to be every link you click on. It'll be much more random. And there'll be some pattern to it, but you have to look closely to figure out what that pattern is, whether there's every 10th one you click on, or the first one you click on after 23 minutes of inactivity, or whatever. So the point is, it'll be pretty random, but if the user reports that they're frequently going to websites or getting redirected to websites other than what they thought they were clicking on, it'll be a pretty good indication of a rootkit infection. The next one is what I used to call my 100% indicator of a rootkit infection. That is, you can't manually do a Windows update. Interestingly enough, with this, you might still be getting the automatic updates just fine, but you try to go to do a manual Windows update, it may fail. And of course, there are a lot of things that cause problems with Windows updates, but rootkits are certainly one of them. Usually if it is a rootkit interfering with the manual Windows Update, it'll either be a generic message, couldn't connect to the server or something like that, or it may be a Windows Update specific message that ends in 72EFF. So either of those would pretty well be an indication of a rootkit infection blocking that manual Windows Update. I say that used to be my 100% indicator. Up until a couple of years ago, every computer I saw that was infected by a rootkit had that limitation, could not do a manual Windows Update. Then about a year ago, I had one that I knew had a rootkit infection and was still able to do a manual Windows Update. So it became my 99% indicator. And since then, I've seen a couple of more that I knew had rootkits but still could do manual Windows Updates. So it's not 100%, but it's still in the 90% plus range. Very high probability that that is a rootkit indicator. Another symptom that shows up some, if not as common as some of the others, you download a file, it downloads successfully, but as soon as it finishes, a window pops up from the system tray saying the file you just downloaded, and it'll echo back the name of that file, was infected by a virus, so it's been deleted. So if you see that, that's another indication of rootkit infection. There's actually another symptom that has become more common recently. It was popular a few years ago, then went away for about 5 or 6 years, but now I'm seeing more and more of them. And that is that a radio station is playing out of the computer. Now, obviously, any of us can go to a radio station's website and say live stream now or play the current show or whatever. But I'm talking about a radio station playing without a browser even being open, much less the user having asked for it. When I say radio station, it could be music, it could be talk, it could be commercials, it could be English, it could be some other language. But you obviously don't have to listen very long to figure out that it is a radio station playing. And that is another example of a rootkit infection. When that happens, they can be really nasty, hard to get rid of. They are very resource intensive. In fact, when you get into them in more detail, what you'll find is that most of the CPU utilization is sucked up by that process. And by the same token, there are multiple processes running, each one with active internet connections or network connections. So you're sucking up a lot of CPU cycles and a lot of network bandwidth in running that type of rootkit. So those are 4 different symptoms that are pretty well clues to you that there is a rootkit present. Any one of them is a pretty good indicator, but certainly if you have 2 or more, pretty much guaranteed that there is a rootkit present. Now, most antivirus programs have some rootkit detection, but it's generally pretty lame. And the anti-malware programs, like Malwarebytes, will tend to have more of it, but it's still not as effective as what you really need to find and get rid of all the rootkits. So just know that it can take some more extensive digging and additional tools beyond what you're normally used to dealing with. So there's several different ways that rootkits actually operate. A common method is to take an existing legitimate Windows component, a process like Explorer.exe or LSASS.exe or one of those, and infect it. So when you or I are looking in Task Manager or Process Explorer, everything looks normal. But little known to us, it's actually the infected version of that file. Another relatively new method that came out in 2009 with a category of rootkit known as TDL3. Actually, it turns out there were TDL1 and TDL2 rootkits before that, but TDL3s introduced this new approach. That is, they infect the .sys files, the sys files. Those are the device drivers that actually make the hardware work. They're the interface between the hardware device and the operating system. So if they infect those sys files, it will have a dramatic impact on the ability of the user to even get anything useful out of that machine. And just as an example, some of the infected sys files I've seen have been a tappy.sys, which is what controls the hard drive, keyboard, PCI, and ANSI. All of those have been infections I have personally seen, and there could be a lot of others. The other nasty thing about the infecting of sys files is that doesn't show up in Task Manager or anywhere that you or I could manually look for it. So we have to rely on some automated tools to find them and get rid of them. Another type of rootkit that also has been around for a long time, in fact all the way back to the early days of computers with floppy disks. They'll infect the boot sector and or the master boot record of the drive. And again, this first happened on floppies, but now it's obviously mostly a factor with hard drives. And those also, every time you reboot, and that becomes what's known as a bootkit type of rootkit. So every time you reboot, the computer gets reinfected. Another characteristic of some rootkits is they may hide files in a way that is not just using the hidden attribute. They're hidden even more deeply than that. So in some cases, you may actually have to boot into a non-Windows operating system to get rid of that type of rootkit. Again, not very common, but it does happen. Another thing about rootkits is just like malware in general, they know which programs are widely used and could be very effective, and so some of them will block execution of those programs. And the general anti-malware program that I recommend and touched on last week is Malwarebytes. And a lot of malware will block Malwarebytes from running. By the same token, on rootkits, the program I normally use first and recommend to you is from Kaspersky called TDSS Killer. TDSS Killer is very effective, does a good job, and runs pretty quickly, and is frequently blocked by the rootkits themselves. So just know that's another thing you may have to deal with. So with that, we pretty well covered all of the major steps in the methodology. Again, first one, find and remove any rogues. Once that's done, go into the traditional malware, whether it's through Task Manager, Process Explorer, or whatever. And there are likely to be multiple processes you have to deal with there. Find them, identify them, stop them from executing, and stop them from coming back. And finally, find and remove any rootkits. So that's the overall methodology, kind of the 100,000-foot view of it. There are a couple of questions that come up on a regular basis, so I'll go ahead and address those, and we'll get into other issues. Safe mode. Different people have different opinions, but my opinion about safe mode is I only want to use it when I have to. Normally, I do all malware cleanup in normal mode, and I only get into safe mode if I have to because I can't get into normal mode. There are a couple of reasons for that. In safe mode, you're not seeing what the user's seeing, and you can't really clean it up if you're not seeing what they're seeing. So normal mode is required in order to do that. Another aspect of that is that there's some things you can't do in safe mode, like add remove programs. And even as sophisticated as some of this malware is, some of it is actually trying to play nice to the point that once you've identified it, you can actually find it in add remove programs and uninstall it from there. So one of the things that gets into is the difference between what you and I know as malware and what some vendors try to represent themselves as being PUPs, potentially unwanted programs. You've probably seen that term in dealing with Malwarebytes and other anti-malware programs. And really it's just their weasel wording to keep from being sued or being threatened with a lawsuit for calling something malware. Because that vendor could say, well, we're not malware. The user asked for it. So there was a checkbox that said install this program. And you know and I know that was done in a way that the user never saw it or realized they had an option, and so it's all bogus. But the point is to avoid that type of confrontation or potentially legal action, vendors like Malwarebytes aren't calling everything that's malware, malware. They're calling some of it potentially unwanted programs. And so what I'm saying is some of those, in the interest of playing nice and acting like legitimate software, will actually let you remove them or uninstall them through add remove programs. But the point is, in safe mode, you can't do add remove programs. So that's some of the functionality I'm talking about, and the fact you may miss some of the malware symptoms. So if you do use safe mode, and again, it's just as long as you have to, you probably want to do it with networking, so that if you need to access something across the network, whether it's to print to a network printer or access something from the internet, doing safe mode with networking gives you at least that functionality. Now, one thing that a lot of people have kind of been misled about, safe mode is not a way to make sure the malware doesn't execute. Plenty of malware executes in safe mode. It all depends on how it's activated in the first place. So it's not a cure-all, but it may get past some of the limitations that are keeping you from doing things the way you'd want to. The other issue that I also touched on last week was System Restore. And again, System Restore is potentially useful, especially if you're dealing with some rogues, to take you back to a time before the rogue was active. The malware itself will sometimes disable System Restore capability. It may do that either by killing the program itself, deleting it, or doing something to make it unusable, or the System Restore files. So there's no guarantee that you will be able to use System Restore if you're dealing with an infected system. But again, it could serve a useful purpose. But just like I talked about safe mode, some malware will survive that. And so a better way, a more likely way to make it work is to boot to safe mode command prompt and do your System Restore from there. And the actual command there from a command prompt is rstrui.exe. Once you do that, it'll come up to the normal System Restore window in the graphical user interface and let you select the restore point you want to go back to. The one thing to be aware of, even if you are able to do a successful system restore, that generally doesn't actually remove any malware. The system is still infected in most cases. It's just taking you back to a time before it was active and before those roadblocks are thrown up that block you from running Task Manager, Regedit, or whatever. In some cases, it does actually remove the malware because System Restore does clean out any new entries in the temp folders or temporary internet files. And so if the malware is just in those locations, then yes, it may actually be gone after the System Restore. But most sophisticated malware will put itself in a more permanent location, so System Restore won't permanently get rid of it. But the main point is System Restore could get rid of some of those roadblocks. So one more time, review what we've covered last week and this week, how to handle rogues differently from traditional viruses. How to tell when a computer is infected by a rootkit, the 3 telltale signs plus number 4 with the radio station, and how to keep from spending hours scanning an infected computer. And again, what we're talking about is going directly to the source of the infection, getting rid of them so you don't have to scan with one after another, and hope for the best. And how to keep malware from returning after you've removed it, and that's by being sure you found the activation point for it, usually in the registry, and also identified and gotten rid of any buddy processes that may contribute to that. So that's kind of the overview of what you can do, and hopefully enough for you to start doing right away, and hopefully some of you have already been doing that in the last week. But as a lot of you may have been hoping for, there is a better way, what I call virus remediation training. And that's a more extensive workshop. It's actually an 8-hour workshop that goes into a lot of this in much more detail. And so here the main thing is made up of basics, education, tools, and methodology. And what you've seen last week and this week are excerpted from that overall 8 hours, and it's usually done in 2 half days. And it typically runs actually more like 9 hours of actual classroom instruction. But you might be interested in knowing what the typical results are from that full workshop. And here they are. You will find and remove over 95% of all the malware on infected systems. And fewer than 5% of them will come back. And you'll do all that in less than 2 hours. Now, if that sounds a little bit far-fetched, trust me, those are very conservative numbers. And in fact, there's a guarantee along with it for those of you that may choose to take the full workshop. The education piece of it, again, concentrated training, it's really presented in 4 sessions. The first session is the introduction, kind of an expanded version of what I started this webinar off with terminology, definitions, how malware has evolved over the years, how different it is today from what it was even just a year or 2 ago, but certainly 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So from there, we go into session 2, which is all about the registry. And I know all of you are techs, you've been in the registry, you know what it looks like, and pretty much the basics of the registry. What I found, though, is that most people, what they know about the registry is based on, they found an article in the Google search that says, to fix this problem, go find this key in Regedit and change it. And the reality is, to be good at malware removal and keeping it out and recognizing how the symptoms relate to the causes, really takes a thorough understanding of the Windows registry, which frankly has been hard to come by. Over the years, I've found very little really usable registry training. So that's what session 2 of the full-day workshop is all about. Starting with the structure of the registry and where it's physically located, how that's broken down into hives, keys, and subkeys, the different data types that are used in the registry, what those mean to you and what gets used when and where. Safely editing the registry using various tools. It's not just Regedit. There's some other tools that are available to you and that in some cases you need to be aware of to safely edit the registry. We talk about control sets, the role they play in the registry, and the changing role with the newer operating systems. How users are handled in the registries, how you can identify them, back them up, and do what you need to related to specific user issues. And most importantly, registry backup and recovery techniques so that you won't hurt yourself in the process of going through the registry. And as the bullet point says, much more with 24 major topics covered in that session. As far as the tools, when most techs talk about or think about tools, you think in terms, or we think in terms, of scanning tools like Malwarebytes and TDSS Killer and programs like that. And I certainly include those in my definition, but I'll take a broader definition of tools overall because it does include the workbook that comes along with the workshop. It's up to 125 pages now, plus the 22-page supplement that a lot of you already have, which is that separate booklet, Advanced PC Troubleshooting Techniques, Tips, Tools, and Tricks. If by any chance you don't have that, toward the end I'll give you a reminder of how to get your very own copy. But the point is that 22-page supplement is stuff that originally appeared in the workbook. And the workbook is continually updated. In fact, the version I'm on now just came from the printers last Monday. And the previous version had 121 pages. So it keeps growing. Things keep getting added to it or being updated. As far as scanning tools, one of the dirty little secrets I didn't tell you earlier, but something you need to know about, there are a lot of them have been around for a long time. And on one hand, it's a good thing. They've been around for a long time. They're still out there and still putting out current updates. What that doesn't tell you is that, yes, they have current updates for the type of viruses they know about, but some of those don't know about some of the new infection methods, and there are new ones coming out all the time. So in the full workshop, we get into more details, naming names of which ones to use, which ones to quit using. But again, the workshop is not about doing a bunch of scans. In fact, just a little bit of a spoiler alert here, when you get through the whole workshop, the total amount of scanning you'll be doing is a maximum of 3 scans for a total of about a half hour. So a lot different from what most people think of in terms of doing multiple scans. But even with that, even when you identify the particular scanning tools, and I've already named 2 of them, Malwarebytes and TDSS Killer, if you don't use them in the right sequence with the right options, then they're not going to be fully effective or going to take a lot longer than necessary. So as far as other tools, everybody that attends the full workshop gets a CD that's what I call the Virus Repair Toolkit. That includes a lot of stuff, including some freeware, some of which you're already aware of and using, like Malwarebytes and probably TDSS Killer. Some others I can almost guarantee you've never heard of. You have links on that CD-ROM to download your own up-to-date legal copies of those programs. In addition to that, there's some software on the CD that I have personally created, not available anywhere else except to people that attend the full workshop. In addition to that, right now there are, I think the current count is up to 7 different vendors that like what I'm doing, want to support it. They say that anybody that completes your workshop, we will give them our software for free. And the exact terms and the value is, it varies from one to another, but it's name brand stuff and things that there's a good chance you would have gone out and paid for anyway. And I'm adding new vendors all the time, but right now, just the ones that are currently on board, it's over $450 worth of free software for any graduate of the workshop. As far as the methodology, that's where we get into session 3, the actual virus repair techniques. Again, an expanded version of what we talked about last week and this week, the step-by-step procedure to detect the presence of viruses and other malware and get rid of them. A lot of that involves how it hides from you, the different hiding places in the registry, how you can detect it, get rid of it, keep it from coming back. That starts off with the run keys. In the registry, the run keys are the mechanism Microsoft put in there from the beginning for vendors to use to let their program start up automatically when Windows starts. And the bad guys use those too, but they've gone way beyond what Microsoft ever had in mind with the run keys. So we talk about that as a starting point, and then from there go into much more obscure areas of the registry and some of the different places they've taken it. And just so you'll know, we talk about over 200 specific registry keys that I have personally seen infected with malware. Also there we get into dealing with rootkits. What's different about those, how you have to look at them differently, and again making that determination of what you have. And effective use of the Virus Repair Toolkit, talking about what all is on the CD and how you use it, and once again much more with 21 major topics covered. And finally, session 4 is the lab session. That's where we get into the actual demonstration of the different tools and how they work, what they do. Anybody that attends one of these workshops in person is invited to bring in an infected computer. We'll clean it up in the lab session. So that's what it's all about there. When we do it in a full day, there's generally what it looks like. So these numbers will vary depending on starting and ending time, but basically about an hour for the introduction, 2.5 to 3 hours for the registry. The methodology is about 3 hours, sometimes a little bit over that, and that kind of blends into session 4, the lab session, about an hour there. So overall, we're looking at actual clock time classroom instruction between 8 and 9 hours, and again, usually spread over 2 half-day sessions. So if you're interested in digging that deep and learning more about it, you have several options as far as how and where to do that. I do schedule training here in my office in Houston about once a month. In addition to that, if you're in the Houston area, or even if you're not, I do on-site training at your location, especially if you have a lot of techs that need to be trained, and a lot, that number varies depending on where you are. In the Houston area, it could be as few as 4 or 5 techs that could be cost-effective to come to you instead of having to have them come to my office. Out of town, obviously, some of that depends on the travel expenses. But I've done a lot of on-site training, a lot of locations far from Houston. But also, I'm doing more and more remotely. And in fact, that's probably about 75% of what I'm doing now is online courses, so you can attend from your home office or shop, whatever. In fact, I just finished one of those today. But here's my email address to get more of a schedule and pricing for on-site training. I'm going to go on to the next slide, but I'll come back to this, or at least give you that contact information if you don't have it somewhere else. But here are the actual dates that are scheduled right now if you're interested in digging deeper, learning more, and getting into it. The next one in my office will be on, and most of these are on Tuesdays, Wednesdays. So March 3rd and 4th, and those run from 10 to 3 each day with an hour for lunch. And they're, again, expecting to run a little bit over. The online classes, I do them at different times of day to accommodate people in different time zones, different parts of the world. So the most popular ones are the evening ones. At least they're evening in the U.S., 6 to 10 in the evening. As it happens, that's a starting time of 11 o'clock the next morning in Australia. So a lot of my Australian attendees sign up for those. And a lot of people in the U.S. or North America like that because it doesn't take away from the billable time, 9 to 5 or whatever. So next one of those is coming up next week. The following week, 10 to 2 in the 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. All of these times are Central Standard Time, and so you can convert that to where you are, or I can help you with that if you need my help. Also, I'll be doing the evening one, March 17th and 18th. I also have a fair amount of travel in March, and so those two are the only March dates that I have booked so far. There might be one more, but probably not. And I'm one of those strange people that still enjoys getting on airplanes and going other places, and so I do plan to hit some other cities in the U.S. in 2015 and actually some international travel the second half of the year and into 2016. So just a review of what's included. It's not just the class. There's now a certification. You are designated once you graduate as a Certified Malware Removal Specialist, a CMRS, along with the fancy parchment printed certificate and a badge for your website. Beautiful badge that actually one of the graduates came up with not long ago to show that you are a CMRS, and that's a very small percentage of all the techs in the world right now. Also, whether you attend in person or an online version, you get links to replay the workshop for 30 days after. So if you need to go back and hear something again, or remember a context, or what something meant, or whatever, that's available to you. And it actually could be as long as about 45 days. It depends on when they roll off my server, but typically 30 to 45 days, they'll still be available for replay. Also, I have a membership program. It's what I call the Continuing Malware Education Program to let you stay current. And the cost of the workshop includes the first 12 months membership in that. So you can always download the latest materials, and I'm always updating and sending out new information about new malware as it shows up, what I know about it, what it takes to deal with it, and additional vendors that sign on and say, here's some more free software for you. That also gives you 12 months access directly to me to answer questions, to help out with infected machines. And I'm not at all hesitant to remotely connect to an infected machine and help with the diagnosis. And that's one thing I didn't mention earlier, but most of what I teach in the methodology can be done remotely. About the only time you can't go through this methodology and clean up is if you can't boot that computer. If it's a blue screen or something that requires on-site, then nothing we can do about it remotely. But overall, about 95% of the infections that I hear about and get asked to help with, I can access remotely and take care of. I mentioned bonus software, and again, as of today, the suggested retail price of the free software that other vendors have offered is over $450. So with that in mind, you might wonder what the cost of this training is. And yes, it's not free, but it's very nominal, $495 per attendee. And that includes all the stuff we just talked about. And as my thank you for staying on for the webinar this long, which most of you are still here, you're entitled to a 10% discount. So that brings it down to $445.50. If you have multiple people in your organization that need the same training, we have discounts for those. I'll be glad to talk to you one-on-one about that, and that actually comes into play with as few as 3 techs, maybe even for 2, depending on how nice you are to me. But again, that also includes 12-month membership in the Continuing Malware Education Program. And most of you are probably way ahead of me on this. The class pays for itself just right away, typically in a matter of weeks, if not days. And in fact, I actually have an ROI calculator on my website. You can plug in your numbers and see. But here's basically what it's based on. There are really only 3 things to consider. How many hours are you spending right now on a typical malware cleanup or repair? What's your starting point? How many of those do you do in a typical week? You do 1 or 2 or 3 a day, or is it once a month, or whatever? And finally, what's your hourly rate? Take those 3 factors, plug them into the spreadsheet, and that shows you your payoff. So for example, if you're already pretty good, if you're doing a typical malware cleanup in 3 hours, and this just brings it down to 2 hours, you save 1 hour per repair, you're doing 1 of those a day, 5 per week, and your hourly rate is just $62.50, which I hope most of you are well above that. On that basis, in 8 days, you have made back more than the investment of the workshop. And that's based on the pre-discount. So with 10% discount, 7.2 days. And the reality is it's probably going to be much better than that, but I don't want to overpromise. I want to underpromise and overdeliver. But again, on my website, there's an ROI calculator you can download and plug in your own numbers. There is a guarantee that comes with the workshop. I talked about these numbers, but here I'm putting my money where my mouth is. You will find and successfully remove over 95% of all malware on infected machines. Actual number pretty close to 100%. Less than 5% will come back. Actual number, for all practical purposes, 0. And it'll do it all in less than 2 hours. Actual number, usually less than 1 hour, and one of the latest tools that has just been added brings that down by another 10 or 15 minutes. So I actually got a testimonial last week from a gentleman that attended a class, and he said the first 2 repairs he did, 15 minutes each. And he said his normal process would have been about 24 hours. Yes, it was a bunch of automated stuff he walked away from, but the point is there was still some manual stuff he had to do along the way, and the client was without the use of the computer for 24 hours. He got that down to 15 minutes. The next one was one he had been working on for a month remotely, and did that in 15 minutes also. So as the mutual fund people would say, past performance is no guarantee of future results or whatever. But point is, that's what's possible. And anything that doesn't fit into those parameters, you can work with me directly. I will take you by the hand or walk you right through it, actually fix the problem for you with anything that doesn't fit into those guidelines. Not many people have needed to take me up on that, but it's definitely included if you need it. So if that's of interest to you, if you want to attend a class, I would encourage you to reserve a space as soon as you know what date's going to be good for you. These are all small classes, and a lot of them fill up. With the remotes, I limit that to a maximum of 10 remote attendees. And on those, they do have two-way audio access. So they're audio questions and answers, unlike a big webinar like this where everybody had to be muted for the sake of being manageable. So it's fully interactive in the online workshops. In the Houston workshops, the one here in my office, I have a pretty small conference room, so 6 is an absolute maximum. Really 4 is the most that's comfortable. But if you're in or close to Houston, and I've had people come from so far 5 different states to Houston for the workshops to be in person. If you do come in person, the first 4 are invited to bring in infected computers, and we'll clean them up during the lab session. And frankly, it's unlikely that we'll have as many as 4, but I do need to set a limit. So I'm going to put on my salesman hat for just a second here and ask you to talk about or think about what it'll cost you not to have the training. One is if you do actually charge for all the time you're spending on it, clients are certainly going to be unhappy. They may pay it, but if they do, they sure won't come back, and they'll tell their friends. Or even worse, if you're spending a lot of time you can't bill for, especially if you're a larger operation, an MSP, where you've got your clients on a monthly per computer rate and can't charge them for that time. Then I had one attendee that had actually had to eat an $1,800 bill for some virus cleanup. So that'll pay for the course real quickly, even for multiple attendees. From the client standpoint, especially small business clients, if they're without the use of that computer or access to it for a day or longer, that can really be very expensive for them, very inconvenient to say the least. If you do choose to nuke and pave, customer is not going to be happy in the great majority of cases. Again, you're going to lose something, and best case, it's not going to look the same as it did before they brought it to you. And even worse, if you tell the client the machine is all cleaned up, take it back, they put it into service, and the malware comes right back. They're sure going to be unhappy about that, and you can't charge them for the second cleanup. So that's the end of the sales pitch. But if you want more information, more details, I have pretty extensive knowledge or information about it on my website, and there's the site. This is not a directly clickable link, but just go to thevirusdoc.com, and you'll see the selection for virus remediation training. And again, you're welcome to contact me directly to either make sure a date is available that you want, reserve a seat, or if you want to talk about multiple attendees or scheduling on-site or whatever, there's my email address. And this is actually my cell number. On my website, it just has the landline, which I frankly don't always remember to check as often as maybe I should. But there's my cell, which is the quickest way to get to me, or email. I respond to email pretty quickly, or at least I see email pretty immediately. I can't always respond to it immediately. But those are the two best ways to contact me. So with that, your next steps, if you want to dig deeper, again, you're entitled to a 10% discount on the workshop, and that brings it down to $445.50 to attend. And I will give that to you when we talk or when we email. And I don't put the coupon code out here for a couple of reasons. For one, you never know when somebody might watch this from YouTube 6 months from now, or maybe whatever. But also, that's my way of keeping the classes within those sizes that I want. So when we talk or when we email, let me know the date, and once we've agreed on one and I've said yes, there's space in it, then you get the coupon code. But I'm not trying to hold it back. I'm just trying to keep it from getting used inappropriately. Now, I recognize that a lot of people in this business are fairly new at it, and a lot of us are one-man shops or one-person shops. In fact, I'd say that overall, I don't have an exact number of this, but all the hundreds of people that have been through this workshop in the last almost 6 years now, probably about 3/4 of them have been one-person shops. And so there again, cash flow could be an issue. And so if that is a potential consideration for you, you do have the option of using PayPal credit, which they used to call the Bill Me Later option. The point is that gives you up to 6 months to pay, and in most cases the workshop should have paid for itself many times over before that's due. And then there's the website, again, thevirusdoc.com, and so that'll take us to questions, and I'm going to go back to all of my contact information, leave that on the screen, and go to Monty. So Monty, you got some questions coming through, presumably.
Yes, there's a question what the coupon code is. Obviously, you'll need to call or email for that.
Right.
There is a question, can we register with you right now on the webinar? And I think you need to have them call or email you. Is that correct?
Yeah, and actually, here's an option that I don't necessarily recommend, but if you want to be sure that you're first on the list or whatever, the website is obviously up right now and available, and you can go to the virus remediation training page and the registration. You can register without the coupon. In other words, pay the full price, and then in the next hour or so, once I get this wrapped up, I'll go on. Anybody that does that, I will refund you that 10% discount. And so if you really want to be sure you can get right in the one you want, then that's something that you could do, but again, I'm not saying you need to. The reality is a lot of the classes don't fill up, and obviously I wish they all would. I want everybody to have this information, but the reality is it's just me, and so there's a limit to how much I'm able to get the word out. But if you have a date that looks good to you, if you want to go ahead and send me an email right now, I will get back to you as soon as the webinar is over, and we'll take care of you as much as possible.
Okay, there is a question. There's a typo in one of the slides. The word methodology is spelled incorrectly, and so Ken, I'm just going to send you an email to remind you to search the slideshow for this particular misspelling.
All right, thank you. And I pride myself on no typos, so I'm interested in seeing that.
And there is. I'm trying to pull it up here in a way that I can. Okay. There is a new strain of ransomware. Oh, okay. The word is registry.
Ah,
Sorry,
okay.
under the methodology slide, there's the word registry is misspelled in there.
Okay.
There is a new strain of ransomware that you're being advised about, and I'm going to, that's obviously a link, so I'm going to copy and paste that in an email to you.
Okay. And obviously there's new stuff all the time, and so I appreciate your mentioning that, bringing it to my attention, and if it's something I don't know about, I'll definitely dig into it more. And just so you'll know, people ask how I can possibly keep up with all this stuff, and my stock answer used to be I had to read 3 hours a day to stay current. Now it's more like 5. I haven't even counted the number of vendors, websites, newsletters, e-zines, podcasts, webcasts, conferences. I'm going to a conference tomorrow, an all-day internet security conference, and talking to some vendors there. And so it's just an ongoing challenge, and that's just to stay up with the malware aspect of it. And I'm still doing a lot of the traditional broke-fix stuff too, in terms of networking or computer's slow or printer doesn't work, whatever. So yeah, it's there's always something new to be concerned about.
Okay, and that is that link is on its way to you in an email, and I think that brings us up to date on all the questions and feedback.
Okay, great. Well, we still stayed right within the target time. I was hoping to hold it 45 minutes to an hour, and so we're right there. I'm happy to hang around for another few minutes in case there's anybody that hadn't been able to get to the question box yet, or anything is still percolating. But as I say, as soon as this is over, I'll be checking my email. Any of you that have asked for specific dates and coupon codes, I'll get back to you pretty quickly. Okay, I'm showing 52 minutes after, and once it strikes 53, I'll
okay. Very much appreciate your time, and webinar will contact you regarding training in the very near future. Thanks again for taking the time, and thanks to all of you for your time online tonight.
And Monty, thanks for your help. And all of you have my contact information. I look forward to hearing from you and hopefully see some of you in an upcoming workshop. So have a great evening, and we'll be in touch.